I feel blessed to be here, obviously. As I was driving in today on campus, I felt a little sadness and a little regret because I didn't go to college as a young person. So every time I'm on a college campus, whether it's one like UCLA or at the Culinary Institute of America with Dr. Ryan, I always get a great sense of pride that I can come on a campus for a number of different reasons, and certainly today is very special. Not having that kind of training, nor having any formal culinary training. When I started cooking in the early 70s, as some of you remember, America's culinary reputation was pretty low. We didn't have a lot of respect for chefs back then. We didn't have a lot of knowledge of our farmers, our fishermen, our foragers, or our gardeners back then. So I've kind of seen over the past 35 years, 40 years, this profession grow into a true profession. And it's something that when you look at this country, you understand how opportunity impacts individuals. And in 40 years, we now stand at the top of respect around the world from a culinary platform. We certainly have some of the best restaurants in the world. We definitely have some of the best chefs in the world. And we certainly have some of the best farmers, fishermen, foragers, and gardeners in the world, which help us elevate the quality of the experience for our guests in so many ways. And I'm very, very proud to be part of this very dynamic and growing profession. So, Roger, thank you very much. Everybody here at UCLA and everybody here at the conference. It's a real honor for me to be standing up here today and accepting this award. There have been so many people who've been part of my success. Roger spoke briefly about the experience I had with raising money for the French Laundry. But even before that, the training that I received from so many people, beginning with my mother, who had an extraordinary influence on my life, my brother, who was a chef at a young age and who helped me, a gentleman named Roland Hennon, who became my mentor and who really taught me the significance of what a cook does, which made me embrace this profession as a career. And what Roland Hennon taught me in that July in 1977 is that what we do as cooks, no matter what kind of cook you are, whether you're cooking at the highest peaks of haute cuisine or cooking in a diner for your friends that are in your community, cooks cook to nurture people. And at that moment, on that day, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And that's why I became a chef, was because I wanted to nurture people. I look throughout my life, and there's been so many individuals who've helped train me, who've helped mentor me, and certainly have helped support me throughout this career. And it's all of them that this award really belongs to. Our restaurants today have a high level of regard from our colleagues as well as from our guests around the world. And it is because of those individuals who began those restaurants and who have laid that foundation for so many more who have come after them. And I continuously remind our young staff that they are responsible to all those individuals that came before, that have helped build that foundation that they now thrive on. And it's up to them to continue to reinforce and strengthen that foundation for the next generation. Because it truly is the next generation that we have to be concerned about, making sure that we are able to recognize who they are, give them the training, give them the mentorship so that they can become better than us. Because if they're not better than us, then we haven't really done our job. So it's really to that next generation of young culinarians, young people in our hospitality profession that I want to make sure that we focus on, and we do everything we can as a profession to support them. Thank you very much.
Chef?
Chef?
Awesome. Hello, everybody. So it's fun to pose some questions to you, and you get interviewed a lot. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, what are the questions that you most often get asked, if you can think of them? Because I'm not going to ask those questions.
How to get a reservation at the French Laundry?
Number one. People call and ask me that question too.
Right. How can I make my food taste like yours?
No.
is a very common question. It's hard to say what the other ones are. So I'm really curious to hear what your questions are today after us knowing each other for such a long time. You probably asked me everything that is under the sun. But let me see.
Yeah. You know, I had to, because we do know each other well, I had to kind of think of what would be interesting for you, because we've covered lots of ground, much of which will not be unearthed today, by the way. So Thomas, let me just start out with the first question. This is a big year for you. Mm-hmm. It's a historic year. Folks in our audience may or may not be aware that it is in July, I think, 20th anniversary of the opening of the French Laundry. We just it's the 15th anniversary of the opening of Bouchon, and we just celebrated the 10th opening of Per Se.
And Bouchon in Las Vegas.
And Bouchon in Las Vegas. So congratulations on those milestones.
Thank you.
And if you think about what in 20 years you've accomplished, and I know you're very forward-looking, so you don't look back often, it's kind of extraordinary. Not only did you open those restaurants, but Ad Hoc and Bouchon's, several different Bouchons. You wrote 4 different books. You developed a gluten replacement flour, and a zillion other things. How does all that feel? How do you feel about that? Do you ever reflect back? Is this a good year to look back and say, wow, what's happened to me?
It's an interesting question. You're right. I don't reflect back very often. I'm always thinking about what we're going to do today, what we're going to do tomorrow. I always tell my team, we do get several things written about us, and I always remind them that whatever's written about us today was about what we did yesterday. And we shouldn't really be concerned about what we did yesterday, but we should be concerned about what we're going to do tomorrow. Looking at the kind of big picture, it amazes me, all of the things that, and I don't say me because it's not just me. I think all of you know that. There's an extraordinary group of individuals that are around each one of you, and you're all part of a team at the end of the day. So I've been blessed to have an extraordinary group of individuals around me that have had the confidence and the courage to take steps forward and to, in many ways, encourage me to take those steps forward with them. You talked about Cup for Cup and Lena, giving her the platform to develop that, and then helping her launch it. But now she's taken over. So it's really, we have a wonderful kind of collaborative effort in our group, and that's something that I certainly cherish, and something that I truly believe has helped us evolve at a rapid rate. So yeah, looking back, there are so many things that I am extraordinarily proud of. But I think the one thing that I'm mostly proud of is all of those young men and women who have come together with that common vision and that common goal of excellence, and helped each of us achieve that every day.
Right. Well, let's go back to your childhood. Since it's kind of a momentous historic year, I really want you to reflect back and maybe share some things. And the first thing I want you to share is a little bit about your mom and your dad. The chef was born in California, Camp Pendleton, right?
Right.
His dad was Marine. His mom managed restaurants. And he's like the perfect cyber combination of these two individuals, I think. Tell us a little bit about your mom and your dad, and obviously there's some genetic thing
right.
in you that they brought to you that has made you the success that you are.
Right. Well, my father was a Marine, and if any of you have ever known anybody that's been a Marine, or certainly in the armed service, you know the dedication and commitment that takes. But also the idea of rituals, and repetition. That's so important in being in the armed service. And certainly that's something that we deal with all the time in our restaurant. We deal with that high level of hierarchy and that level of respect, that command response. It's always, someone tells you what to do, you say yes and you do it. And that's a very militaristic point of view, and certainly something that my father's personality really was. I mean, that's why he was for 25 years a Marine, and a very good Marine. My mother was a woman who always wanted a better life. She was always striving for excellence. So she always, was a woman that, as much as she was satisfied, she was never satisfied, because there was always the next. How would you achieve what the next level was? And her attention to detail and work ethic was just extraordinary. It was inspiring, and I think that's where a lot of that comes from for me. At a young age, I was the youngest of 5 boys. I have a younger sister, but the youngest of 5 boys. And at an early age, my next brother, Joseph, and I would spend a lot of time in the restaurants my mother ran. She wasn't a culinarian. She was a really good administrator, so she ran restaurants. My father was gone most of the time, and then they were finally divorced, and we moved to Florida. And I remember learning all the disciplines that I needed to learn to become a really good cook while washing dishes. And when you think about it, standing in front of that dishwasher, you have to be extremely organized. So organization was part of that structure, part of the discipline that I learned. You had to be efficient as a dishwasher. You had to make sure that efficiency played a big part in what you did. Feedback was really, really important. You knew right away if you didn't scrape your dishes correctly or rinse them correctly that a minute later when the dish machine opened, they'd still be dirty. So you knew that you had to do this, and the feedback that you got almost instantaneously was really important. I spoke about repetition earlier. You did the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, so you got really good at it. Rituals were really important discipline I learned as a dishwasher. You did certain things at certain times of the day. You emptied the dishwasher every hour and a half. You had to take the garbage out. You swept the floor. You did all these different things at specific times of the day, so rituals were very important. And the last one was teamwork. You were part of a team. Everybody in the restaurant relied on you, from the person behind the bar to the servers to the chefs. They all needed to have something from you in order for them to do their job. So teamwork really became a very important part. So learning those 6 disciplines as a dishwasher really set the stage, I think, for me to be a successful cook.
Yeah, that's great. And when you were growing up, who did you look up to? Who were your heroes?
My heroes. Well, certainly my older brothers, first and foremost, were always my heroes. But then as I started to become a cook, looking around and learning about chefs, Chef Hennon, who I spoke about earlier, gave me my second cookbook, which was a book called My Gastronomy by a chef named Ferdinand Point, who had taught so many of the chefs of the next generation, which were the chefs that we recognize today, Paul Bocuse, Michel Garard, Alain Chappelle, that generation, the generation above Dr. Ryan and I. And that book was really, really profound. And he became, outside of Roland, who was my mentor, he became somebody in my life, even though he'd passed away years before. He became somebody in my life which was an inspiring figure. And up until this day, when a young culinarian comes to our restaurant to work, he's required to read Ferdinand Point's My Gastronomy.
Right. If you've never read the book, you can still buy it. It's still in print. It is really a fabulous read to look back at one of the greatest chefs in history. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned your dishwashing career. Other than your current job, what was your most favorite job and why?
In the kitchen? Well, I think all my life was in the kitchen. I had a short stint as an apprentice carpenter, but most of my life has been in a kitchen. So, I find really liberating moments. And I think that's what's something that I love to think about, is those moments when you have accomplished a task to a point where you don't really have to think about it anymore. So cleaning a salmon, for example. You've done it so many times that it's not in your conscious while you're doing it, you're just doing it. It's repetitive. And it actually becomes liberating. So you can actually start to think about, well, what am I going to do with the salmon after I clean it, right? Which was really, really interesting. So for me, it's those tasks that become almost, I want to say muscle memory, because I think that's something that everybody connect to, that allow you to be thinking about other things. And that's certainly an important process for a chef, is to continuously be in contact with the food, especially if you're a chef de cuisine, continuously be in contact with the food, but being able to also see what's going on around you, that sense of awareness about everything that's going around you, because as a chef, you have to do both. You really have to be aware of the environment that you're in and those that are in your environment, but at the same time fulfilling a task.
Right. So today you're honored for innovation. And I personally think that you, everybody thinks highly of Chef Keller, and the word that's most associated with him, I think, is excellence or perfection, or not bad words to have associated with you. But sometimes your innovative side gets overlooked as a result. Talk a little bit about the process of innovation, how you look at innovation and creativity.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think the first word, I've said this before, the first word that comes to my mind is awareness. And I just used that word a little earlier. Awareness is very important. We all need to be acutely aware of where we are, our environment. And I think that's something that I continuously stress with my team, is that sense of awareness of where you are and what you're doing. Because if you're not aware of where you are and what you're doing and those things around you, then you may miss something. And the thing that you may miss the most is inspiration. People ask me what inspires me. Well, I can tell you things that have inspired me in the past. But most of those times of inspiration has been when I've been acutely aware of what's going on around me, so that when that inspiration comes, I can embrace it. Because it always doesn't happen with food. I could see something and be inspired to do something that has nothing to do with food. With that said, if you're aware and the inspiration comes and you embrace it, then you interpret it into something that's meaningful for you. If a leaf flutters down from a tree, a poet may write a poem, a musician may write a song, I may develop a dish. We're all inspired from that leaf, but we interpret it differently. And then fourthly, evolution. Everything evolves. We have to continuously look for better ways of doing it. We can never be satisfied with saying, this is it. We always have to continue to say, how can I do it better? And you may not answer the question. You may not answer the question for a long, long, long time. But if you stop asking the question, then you'll never answer it. So continuously asking yourself, how can I do it better? Making sure that you're always aware so that when inspiration does appear, you can embrace it and interpret it as something that's meaningful for you. Creativity is one of those words that's a very difficult thing for me to use because I don't really believe that we truly create anything. I think that everything that is on this planet has always been on this planet, right? It's always here. We just use it, we see it, we manipulate it, we're inspired by it, we interpret it differently. It's a constant evolution of what's already here, and I think that's the important thing to remember. I know there's been a lot of talk, in the past 10 years, and some of my colleagues have started to date some of their creations. And, it's kind of, as much as I love most of my colleagues, it's kind of, I think it's a little bit absurd. It's like saying, I put my stamp on this. This is the day that I created this dish. It's like, really? Did you really create that dish? It's just food, right? It's always been here. You may have done something different to it, but it's food. At the end of the day, there's no true creation in that. It's an interpretation of something they saw before. And I think that's something that's really important for me to try to make sure that I continuously speak to, especially to my staff, because I want them to understand the level of modesty in what we're doing, because modesty, I think, is a very important part of who and what we are.
So probably your most famous dish, you have quite a few famous dishes, I would say is oysters and pearls.
Or the cornet.
Well, or the cornet of salmon.
Who knows?
True. Or coffee and donuts.
Or coffee and donuts.
Right. So what date did you create the oyster and pearls? I'm kidding.
Well, I know you're kidding.
But one of the things that we have talked about with respect to things like that you've become well known for, and there's others, is that it's hard to get away from them. And I kind of equate it to there's a certain artistic frustration. Bruce Springsteen has to play "Born to Run" over and over and over again. But if you go to a Bruce Springsteen concert and he doesn't play it, you're kind of ticked off. You feel gypped.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
your greatest hits are kind of the same way. How do you feel about that?
I'm really happy about that. I think it's wonderful to be able to go to a restaurant and have something that you've heard about so many times. I was just recently in Paris, and there's a restaurant there called L'Amboisie. Dr. Ryan knows it well. Bernard Pacot is one of those chefs who's never done anything else. That's his only restaurant. He was an orphan at a young age. He found solace in the kitchen. He worked for Mère Brasier, which is a very famous woman chef in Lyon, whose restaurant's still there today. And he's an extraordinary chef, an extraordinary restaurant. And I have his book. I've had his book for, 25 years when the book came out, maybe longer. And there are many pictures in it, but there's two pictures. There's one of a langoustine dish with sesame tuile and spinach and a curry emulsion, and there's another dish with sweetbreads and olives. And so when I get to the restaurant, I'm looking at the menu, and there it is. And I said, the two dishes I'm going to have the langoustine and the sweetbread. Now, if those dishes weren't on the menu, would I be disappointed? Not necessarily, but I've been thinking about those dishes for 2.5 decades, right? And now I go to this restaurant, and they're there, and I order them, and then the captain, he brings it and puts them down in front of me, and in my mind is that picture, and in front of me, in reality, is the plate. And it's just like, it's so wonderful. So, but also, it also speaks to the idea of repetition and what we think about. There's so many times we all want to do something new, right? Like, people ask me that question all the time, like, what's new? What are you doing that's new? It's like, there's really nothing new. It's like, we're trying to do what we do at a very high level, so we want to focus on that and making sure that we do it correctly. And we challenge ourselves every day to make the oyster and pearl. And we need to make it as perfectly as we can every day. We need to focus on it, even though we've done it every day for 20 years. It's something that is very important. Guests are going to come that night who may have been heard about that dish for 20 years and never had it, and they're looking forward to having the oysters and pearls. And our job, our responsibility, is to make sure that their experience is that experience that we want them to have, and that with that oyster and pearl as an extraordinary experience for them, in the same way that the langoustine with the sesame tuile and the curry emulsion was for me.
Right. And if you haven't had the oysters and pearls, by the way, put it on your bucket list, because it's as close to perfection in food as I think you can accomplish. It is really and truly one of the great dishes of all time. So I would keep it on the menu.
Thank you.
Let's move on, and I'm curious. Generally, in a successful person's life, there's one or two turning points. Do you have one or two turning points that you could share?
Well, what I shared about my mentor, Roland Hennon, certainly when he enlightened me on why cooks cook, and it was such a simple thing that it was just profound for me that day. And I can't remember the day, but I remember the year and I remember the month. It's really hard to pick one or two. I think that you look at the times in our lives when we're challenged beyond what we think we can do, and certainly Roger spoke about when I was trying to raise money for the French Laundry and the 18 months that it took to do that, and my biggest asset was my ignorance, really. I mean, as he said, had I known everything that I was going to have to do before I started to do it, I would have just gave up. I said, I can't do that. But it was those little successes every day. You get up in the morning with that knot in your stomach, and you have a list of people that you don't know, and you've got their phone numbers, and you're calling up and saying, "Can you give me some money?" It's like it's a really difficult thing for me to do. But I challenged myself every day to do it, and I accomplished it. And time after time, the feeling was the same, an anxiety that was both positive and negative, but it drove me forward, and the ignorance propelled me, through those moments when I was unaware of what would lie ahead. But the success of that day fueled my desire and my confidence to continue tomorrow.
So 20 years ago, your typical day, was, making stock, butchering fish and meats and so on. But now you've built quite an enterprise with multiple restaurants and concerns in different locations. What's a typical week like now?
I wish there was a typical week. There is so much comfort, and I still struggle with what I do every day because I don't have that same sense of comfort. I don't have that list I had every day walking into the kitchen with the list that I wrote the night before, really with specific duties that I had to do that day. Clean the salmon, make the stock, whatever. I mean, every night before I left work, I made my list. Every morning I came in, I accomplished what was on the list. And then we start service. And that was my life for 30 years. And then I expanded. And little did I know what that would mean. It was interesting because, and Laura's here today, and she was a big part of that, Laura, in defining what Per Se was going to be, because Per Se was our first real expansion. And we had planned meticulously for 3.5 years what was going to happen. And the one thing that I left out was what was going to happen to me. Because once I opened Per Se, I realized that I couldn't be the chef. I couldn't be the chef anymore. That I had to have 2 chefs, one for Per Se and one for the French Laundry, which kind of left me without a job, really, in a way. And you find different ways to impact different moments, and you embrace opportunities through an analysis of what the potential is for positive growth, right? And positive growth doesn't mean expansion. Positive growth means internal growth sometimes within one kitchen. And it's an important thing for us to look at. And I realize that I'm very lucky. Again, not planning for my future in so many ways has liberated me to help me plan for other people's futures. And I think that's an important thing, because I look back at the last generation before us, the Rachus, the Saltners, the Sayeks, all those great chefs of New York City who had one restaurant. And they almost, in a way, after they became of a specific age that they couldn't work in the restaurant anymore, the restaurant died. The restaurant went away. I think about those great restaurants, the Côte Basque, Lutèce, La Cygne. I mean, they're all gone. And it's kind of sad to me that those great restaurants, with the memory of those great chefs, didn't live on beyond the chefs. And we are now, my generation now has learned from this, and now we have started to forge a new path for chefs, where we don't necessarily die in our kitchens or our restaurants die when we leave. But the legacy of our restaurants and the restaurants will live on through the work that we've done and the support that we give the next generation, as I spoke about earlier. My restaurants and my chefs, I shouldn't say my chefs, our chefs, are better today than I was at their age, in their place. And why are they better? Because they have better support, they have better facilities, they have better education. We have spent enormous amount of resources making sure that everything that they have around them is going to support quality and excellence. And we all strive for that, and it's something that I'm extremely proud of. So I feel that our restaurants are in a better position to continue on and to continue to offer opportunity to further generations And when I step away from the restaurants completely, the restaurants will be there. And that's something that gives me great comfort.
So, well, let's go there then. What is that plan? Have you formulated that plan? You're not yet 60,
No.
so you're still a young man. But you're thinking about the future. So what happens? Because we are very mindful that the past generation, as Chef Keller just said, didn't really have a plan. And so a lot of times, though they were great in their day, they're forgotten. One of the things I have to say, Thomas is a very kind and considerate person, and very respectful of those past leaders. So we just had a dinner that he hosted of all these great chefs of the past era to honor them. It was last week. We were all together for that. It's really a very touching, a really moving, and a very classy thing that he does, not to get acknowledged, but just to reach out to people who inspired him, inspired me, and inspired others. So that's a cool thing. But again, we learned some things. So what are you thinking about for the future? How are you going to process through that, or do you have a plan in mind?
Well, it's a good question, I haven't solidified a plan. You go into a profession because you want to do what that profession represents. So, as Dr. Ryan and I both went into cooking because we wanted to cook. That's what we really wanted to do. We wanted to have a piece of fish, a piece of beef, some vegetable. That was our life, to be able to cook. And then as you grow and you become better at what you do, then you become a sous chef, right? And you start to move up the ladder in management, and then you're a chef de cuisine. And the better you get, the further you get actually away from what the reason was you became what you embraced that profession for in the first place. So I yearn. Every day. I wish. I'm envious. I should say. I shouldn't wish. I'm envious of my young chefs in those restaurants doing that. And sometimes I often think about the expansion, how we have, as my generation has started to expand and do all these different restaurants and all these different things. Many of my colleagues, and we talk about, we just maybe one day we'll just have a little restaurant and just cook in it. And that was kind of the dream when you were a young cook. Maybe one day you'll have a little restaurant and you'll be able to be the chef. And now you achieve that and you go on to bigger things, and then you start to think, well, maybe one day I'll have that little restaurant. I'll be able to cook again.
Exactly. In a minute, we're going to open up the floor for questions from the floor. But let me ask you a question about celebrity. One of the big things that's changed in our lifetime, we entered into a profession that certainly didn't attract the attention that it does today. There was no Food Network. There was no celebrity. How do you feel about that? There's pros and cons.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I didn't, as you said, I didn't become a cook, a chef to become a celebrity. And I kind of really hate the word. I wish that we could change that vocabulary to be leaders. I'd much rather be considered a leader in my profession than a celebrity, because with celebrity comes so many negative thoughts in many ways. There are some celebrities who do some really good work, but as you know, there's some celebrities who do some really stupid things. And the celebrities that do the really stupid things are the ones that get the most recognition, right? So we have to be careful with that word celebrity, and it's something that I always try to avoid, and try to reposition us as leaders of our profession. And I think that really gives a sense of respect to what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be celebrities. Although there are some of our colleagues who kind of embrace that idea and continue to beat that drum, and it's what it is. We all take different paths, and it's hard to be judgmental on your profession and the colleagues that are in your profession.
All right. So we'll open it up for questions from the floor. Yep, please. We have a mic coming right your way.
In my experience, the hard part is keeping your investors happy once you've raised the money, and that's the stressful part. But I wanted you to address that. And also, would Thomas Keller have been successful in somewhere other than where you opened the French Laundry?
Yeah, well, Thomas Keller wasn't successful in other parts. So I have two failures behind me, two restaurant failures behind me. And maybe one or two career failures other than restaurant failures. behind me. So I really embrace my failures because you learn, and many of you know this, I'm not telling you something, you learn so much more from your failures than you do from your successes, don't you? I mean, I think that's true for pretty much everybody. I mean, you burn your finger when you're a child, you certainly don't go near the stove anymore, right? I mean, you've learned that's a true failure. So how do you keep your partners happy? Was that the second part of the question, or that was the first part? I answered the second part. Well, it's easy. You know, in the restaurant world, many investors get involved in the restaurant because they look at it as a status, right? As this, you know, I'm a partner with Thomas Keller. I'm a partner with Eric Prepare. I'm a partner in this restaurant, and that in many ways is enough. But for me, you know, I view it as a real responsibility to make sure my partners are paid back, and you know, I'm happy to say that, you know, in most cases, our partners, you know, certainly our older restaurants, right, which have had years of operation, have paid our partners back, you know, 3 or 4 times. But as much as it's an important thing for me, it's not as important for them. I remember one of my partners in Napa Valley, when he came to see me and I didn't know him, he pulled out his checkbook and he wrote me a check for a share, and he said, "Thomas, I want my wine on the wine list and the reservation when I call." That's all he wanted. I mean, you know, he was going to give me the money anyway. It wasn't a huge investment. I never took money. I've never taken an investment from somebody whose lifestyle was going to change if I didn't succeed. Most of my investors are relatively small when you think about the amount of money that it takes to run a restaurant and to open a restaurant. So my biggest investor at the French Laundry was the Bank of America at the time, and the SBA, right? My smallest investors were those individuals who wrote those checks, but you know, the individuals that wrote the checks are the ones that I make sure that I take care of the most.
I don't know all Thomas's investors, but I know some of them, and man, they're happy. And so it's interesting, one, because you know, obviously he made money for them. But the thing that always strikes me, and this is not only about his investors, but everybody around Thomas, there's a certain capability he has. I'm not sure what it is, but even his investors want to take care of him. You know, they look out for him, and it's a very unusual combination. They want to do well by Thomas, and it's very, very interesting. It's some mojo that he has that brings that out in people. Other questions we have?
That's easy. Roasted chicken is my favorite meal. I love I love foods that have strong reference points and memories to them. And when you think about roasted chicken, it's one of those dishes that I've had so many times in so many different places, and there's so many memories about it. It could be just a good roasted chicken, and I'm still really happy. So I think that's my favorite meal. Just a simple meal, maybe a nice salad, the roasted chicken, and you know, lemon tart or chocolate tart for dessert. It's very, very, very simple.
Are there more restaurants in your future?
You know, Tim and I have talked about this, you know, on a number of occasions, and what chefs are, you know, what should chefs be doing? Should we be opening more restaurants? Should we be expanding? Should we continue to look for new opportunities? There are countless new opportunities for chefs today. All of you know that. I'm not saying that, you know, there is one restaurant that we will probably open in New York City in about 3 years from now. But outside of that, you know, there's nothing really on the horizon for me. The restaurant that is planned for New York City has been planned for probably for the past 4 years. So it's a rather complex development that my existing partners are developing, and they've always wanted to be part of it. So because they are my partners and because I have great respect for them, and we've had a great relationship for the past 11 years, that I'm willing and happy to be part of their new project.
What's it called?
Well,
You're not going to tell us.
the project's called Hudson Yards. Yeah.
Hi, I have a roasted chicken question. So I take the chicken and I rinse it, and then I dry it completely with paper towels, and then I truss it, and I just put heavily kosher salt it. roasted at 400 till the skin is like potato chips, like one big potato chip, and then I eat it.
Sounds like a
It's
good recipe.
fantastic, and
Yeah.
how could I make it better?
I think you can make it better by sharing it with more people. Yes, sir. Well, I think our biggest challenge today is labor. I think that's our biggest challenge for anybody, is finding those individuals who, are truly committed to their craft. And it's something that we're continuously challenged with. And that's one thing about, you talk about expansion, it's easy relatively easy, I should say, to open a restaurant. It's really, really hard to run them for a long period of time. You think about what you're committing to for a 10 or 15 or 20-year lease. And, you have to have a strong commitment and an even stronger will of dedication to be able to make sure that you're running that restaurant successfully. And what it takes is those individuals in the restaurant who are running it day to day. So it's always making sure that there's that continuous flow of talented individuals. So what I've always said, and I've said this for decades, is that, my profession, my business is I run a sports franchise. It's a baseball team, and I'm always looking for those, not only the franchise players, but the utility players as well, and making sure that we identify them at a very young age, and we train them, and we mentor them, and we make sure that they are going to be part of our franchise. Which is important, but if they're not, that's okay as well, because then we'll send them out, and our overarching goal is not about our restaurants. Our overarching goal is about our profession, and it's all of our responsibility that we continuously elevate the standards of our profession by teaching, training, giving the opportunity to those next generations to be better, and that way, that's the way we elevate our profession. And if we do that, then there'll always be that wonderful kind of exchange of talent. And we talk about it at my level with my colleagues. We talk about ways of accomplishing that in a very systematic fashion. We haven't gotten there yet. We haven't put it all together, but we're certainly having conversations on how to do that, how to identify them, how to train them, how to send them out, and give them the opportunities that we didn't have as young chefs, or that we had to fight for as young chefs. But we can make it happen for them relatively easily.
Chef Keller, it's an honor and a privilege to have you here.
Thank you.
With regards to future food trends, we see reports come out each year. Andrew Freeman and company out of San Francisco. Any thoughts or comments on your own on what you see happening? The current thing a lot is with sustainability, local sourcing, et cetera. Any comments on what you envision happening here down the road?
It's a good question. I don't really get involved in trends. People ask me. It's the definition of trend is something that has a beginning and something that has an end. And the last thing I want to be is part of a trend. But what I do want to be part of is a movement, something that has a lasting purpose. And we think about those things. And we talk about, they talk today, and we talk about farm to table as if it was something new. We all know it's nothing new. I mean, this has been around. This is the way chefs have worked for generations. I mean, for decades, if not centuries. I mean, they're so well connected to their farmers. We talk about local, as it has something to do with geography. Local has nothing to do with geography. It has to do with quality. We talk about sustainability like it has something to do with ingredients. Sustainability has nothing to do with ingredients. It has to do with communities. These are the things that we really need to understand and be able to embrace as a strong movement. We talk about this thing as carbon footprint, right? And how chefs are supposed to be responsible for the carbon footprint. Well, that's an absurd thought, right? That's an absurd task to challenge a chef with. I mean, carbon footprint should be the responsibility of the factory farmers, not me shipping my lobsters from Maine to California because they're coming on the same airplane you're traveling on, and they're subsidizing your seat. So there really is no carbon footprint there. I mean, you think about it, you really dig down and you start to understand that what's important is making sure that we are responsible to one another. And something that's very important for all of us to understand is if we want better food, is there anybody in this room that doesn't want better food in their grocery stores, in their lives? Nobody. There's not just somebody, please. There's somebody out there that doesn't want better food, right? So how do you get better food? You pay for it, right? Take your wallet out of your pocket and pay the fisherman, pay the farmer, pay the forager, pay the gardener what he needs to make. We don't do that. We're a culture, we're a society that expects the very best, and we want to pay the very least for it. Well, you're going to get what you pay for. And so far, we haven't achieved the quality that we're looking for because we aren't willing to pay for it.
I'm Daryl Ansel, and I'm the Director of Food and Beverage here, and I have the great pleasure to thank Dr. Ryan and Chef Keller for coming today. So if we can all give them a hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
We started the conference talking about the importance of purpose, and clearly these are two inspirational leaders with just great purpose, and we're so honored to have them today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Daryl, can I just say, I want to say one more thing before you leave, because I think it's important to put it in context. There's a lot of famous chefs, there's a lot of celebrities and so on. You know, or many of you know, Thomas's accomplishments, but it's important. I want you to realize that he's not just a really good chef that has some very successful restaurants that you may want to go to. Thomas Keller is the most important chef in American history. There's no question about that. And it's not something that I say cavalierly. This is the most important chef in American history, and it's inconceivable to me to who the next person will be that will unseat him from that position. And here's the reason why. There's many, many reasons. But the fundamental reason why is Thomas is the very first chef that around the world was viewed as the greatest chef in the world and received that accolade from numerous sources. He's the very first and only American chef to have 2 Michelin 3-star restaurants, to have the #1 ranking in the San Pellegrino list of the world's top 100 restaurants. So when we talk about the ascendancy of America as the preeminent food nation, this is the guy who, for the rest of the world, was the beacon that said, America is great. Thomas Keller is the greatest chef in the world. Imagine what that was for the French to be able to say the greatest chef in the world. No, I say that with all affection. We're both huge Francophiles. Mm-hmm. We grew up revering the French chefs. Amazingly now, you know, as we travel around the world and go to French restaurants or restaurants in Germany or England or Bolivia or wherever, you know, they're all wearing blue aprons because Thomas Keller wears blue aprons, and poaching their butter in lobster, or their lobster in butter, because Thomas Keller does it. So before you leave, I want you to realize that, because sometimes we don't appreciate the truly great ones in their day, the greatest chef in American history. Thank you all.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.